Okay, let's have a look now at some examples of some P's, and then we will P together. So first of all, let's have a look here. How many sentences can you see? Have a quick look. Yes, that's right. There are 3 sentences here. Let's have a look at the first one. One of the main reasons why rich countries should help poor countries is that by doing this, it helps to create a stable global economy. So what's my point? Helps create stable global economy. So if you look at this, you know the question is probably about rich and countries helping poor countries. I believe, based on this, you can see that in my introduction earlier, I would have had my position, which is rich countries should help poor countries. This is my main reason why. It helps create a stable global economy. That's my point. Then we have my example. Now, examples can be difficult. I'll talk about that in a second. But let's have a look at this one. One example is when China helped to develop Mali's sugar cane and tea farming. Okay, now a lot of you guys going, but where do you get these examples from? Actually, I got this example from one of my students. This is probably one of the best examples I've ever heard from a student because it's a very, very specific example, which is great. If the more specific your examples, the better. We can't always do that. Sometimes your examples have to be a little bit general. But I mean, I don't know about this. This person must have read this in a newspaper. And by the way, that's what you should be doing. I think I've said this once before. Read newspapers, magazines, novels regularly. Just every day you should be doing an hour of reading. Every morning, get up and spend 20 or 30 minutes reading English newspaper articles. And you don't need a real newspaper. You know, you can do that on your phone. You can do that online. If you're going to England, read the BBC. If you're going to Australia, you can read abc.net.au. I can't remember actually. Or you can read in Sydney. There's the Sydney Morning Herald. It's one of the better newspapers in Sydney. So depending which city or country you want to go to, read their local newspapers. That's where we get ideas from. That's where we get knowledge from. If you're not sure, the easiest thing is to think of examples around you in your own city, your own country. Generally, Chinese examples are better for Chinese students because you know more about your country. Anyway, so this is a very good example. Let's look at the explain. Such foreign aid allowed this small African country to not only generate thousands of local jobs, but provide a more stable African region and another tea and sugar supplier to the global market. Okay, so it means that that area, because of these jobs, it's going to be more stable. There's not going to be problems in that area. Now, that could be explained more, but for a 250-word essay, that's a good explanation. Sometimes we can't explain really, really detailed way because we just don't have the time and the words. Okay, so that's a good PEE, point, example, explain. What we're going to do now, okay, to P or not to P. Let's have a look at this one. I've got some paragraphs here which were written by students. What I want you to do is look at this paragraph and think, is this a good PEE? Does it have a point, an example, and an explain that fit together well? Okay, so at home, pause your video, take as long as you need to read through that and think about it, and then come back, and I'll just wait for you to pause the video. Okay, let's analyze this together. Well, okay, when I say together, I analyze, you listen. Maybe you got it right. So one reason why focusing on health education is an appropriate measure is that it addresses one underlying cause of the problem. Okay, so my position is that we need to focus on health education. I think this is probably, say, a way of fixing the problem. So the problem is probably bad health amongst children or people in society. Okay, I can't fit the question in every slide, so we just have to have a look at that, and we know that the question is something about health problems. So we're trying to write about focusing on. So we're trying to create a solution. Okay, so focusing on health education is an appropriate measure that addresses the one underlying cause of the problem. It's not really a very good point. It's not very clear. Let's read the next sentence. Maybe it will help. It is clear that there is a connection between what people know about nutrition and their eating habits. So these two sentences together with a bit of editing could maybe make a good point. So it might be the best solution. Okay, so with our position is we need to educate people about health in order to fix the problem. Now, this isn't telling us specifically what the underlying cause is, but it's probably saying that because people don't know about what is healthy and about a healthy lifestyle, they have poor eating habits. Okay, that's kind of what they're trying to say. Okay, so we look at that and we probably say their point is that educating people will mean they have better eating habits. So that's more of their point there. Let's get the example. The example's not too bad. Children who have learned in school about the need to have a varied diet with plenty of vitamins tend to eat more healthily. Okay, this is a pretty good example. It comes from some data or statistics that, okay, in an IELTS essay, we don't need to prove it. In a university essay, you need to prove that. You need to say, where did you get that information from? But that's okay. In an IELTS essay, I mean, it needs to be real. You can't make things up, but it could be something that you read in a newspaper a month ago or a year ago, but you kind of remember it. You can put that in, okay? So that children know more about it, are healthier. Now, in this explain, let's have a look at this one. In contrast, people who have not had this education still eat too much junk food. So this explain is just an opposite of the example. So it's really just an extension of the example, and that's not a bad thing to do. That's one thing you can do in your explain, is look at the other side, opposite what your point and example were. Okay, so that fits quite well together. It's not the best paragraph. The first two sentences are not very clear, but I think the example and explain are pretty good. And remember, these paragraphs are taken from my students, not from me. Okay, let's look at another one. Now, straight away, I'll tell you this is a terrible paragraph, but I want you to think about why. So again, pause your video, study this paragraph, and think about the PEE. Okay, hopefully you've done that. Now, first of all, let's read that first sentence. For those who aiming at, that should be who are aiming at, career success, working on a provisional basis, one might not go further along the enterprise hierarchy and thus those seeking higher positions, for those seeking higher positions. Again, this is from a student. This is basically terrible grammar and ideas. If you look at this, they're trying to say if you want to be successful in your career and go along the career ladder to climb up in a company, working part-time is not good. That's actually their position, not a point. So basically, if you want to be successful in your career, you part-time is work, constantly changing jobs and having short part-time jobs is not good for this. Okay, and that's the question, by the way, for this topic. I remember the question. It's basically, some people change jobs very often. Is this a good thing? About people changing jobs very often. So this whole first sentence isn't actually a reason why it's bad. I mean, it's a bit of a reason because they won't get promoted. Okay, so yes, there is a reason there. It's just very unclear. So the problem with working on a temporary and provisional basis is that you won't get regularly promoted. Okay, so there's a point, but it's very, very, very unclear. Let's look at the next sentence. If employed permanently, one can be assigned a long-term role with a promising career future. So if we do stay in one company, we can get promoted. Now, if you think about that, that's exactly what the first sentence said, but again, in the opposite way. So those first two sentences both use very unclear language, but they say exactly the same thing. Let's look at the third sentence. If working temporarily, the instability might be a hindrance for anyone to offer a promotion. Oh, some wonderful words: hindrance, instability, temporarily, promotion, enterprise hierarchy, provisional basis, permanently, lots of good words. You will not get a good vocabulary score for this paragraph because it doesn't make sense. Good vocabulary means using words that I understand in this paragraph. This paragraph is a terrible paragraph because it doesn't have a clear point, clear example, clear explain, all connected to the topic. If you haven't worked it out, that last sentence says exactly the same thing. Again, in fact, it's just provisional, temporarily. Hindrance to promotion, not go further. It's exactly the same as the first sentence. And the second sentence is just the flip side. So 3 sentences saying the same thing. Okay, and also a good example. I like this example because it means you should not be using all those big words if we can't understand what you're saying. Your vocabulary score will actually be very low. None of those words will help you. Okay, another one to look at. So please pause your video, read through this, think about it as long as you need, and then come back to the video. Okay, even more, when the work is paid, children can understand the difficulty of earning by oneself. Though it's an old saying, it's a way of knowing the value of hard money and considering their parents' hard work. What's more, children can get some money by working by themselves, and that is the third most important thing. So the question is, should teenagers or children work? So they're saying, okay, yeah, working can be good for children. Okay, why? Because they understand the difficulty of earning money. I think that's a pretty good point, even though that's maybe not the best language to introduce the point. It's a pretty clear point. Okay, let's look at the next sentence. It's an old saying, it's a way of knowing the value of money. Well, that's a bit different. That's kind of another point. Considering their parents' hard work. Well, that's kind of the same thing. They understand the difficulty of what their parents do. Get some money by themselves. Well, that's a great point, but again, it's a completely different point. And that's the third most important thing that children will get through this process. Okay, so they're saying, okay, we understand the difficulty, we understand the value of money, and we can get some money of our own. There's 3 things that they can learn. So again, this is what we talked about earlier. 3 points, but they haven't explained or developed any of those points. And with just saying the point isn't enough for a good score. It's not going to be much higher than a 5 for that kind of thing because you haven't developed your argument. Okay, so let's P together. So I'm just going to give you a chance to practice writing at home. So we'll go through a couple of questions. So I'm going to put the question up. You pause the video, and then we'll look at my examples. Okay, so right now, pause the video, try to write your point, your example, and explain, and then you can come back and compare it to mine. Welcome back. Let's have a look at my one. So lifestyles and cultures becoming similar. I think the topic's basically saying, well, people of different nations are living similar lives. Is this a good or a bad thing? I think it's a bad thing. The worst effect of cultures becoming similar is that if this continues, we will lose some beautiful and ancient traditions. Okay, so I have my opinion. This is a bad thing. So first of all, I've kind of thought about the topic, come up with a basic question. This thing is good or bad? It's bad because of this. Okay, well, let's think of an example. This can be seen in China, where fewer young people can sing Peking opera or make shadow puppets. You know, shadow puppets is where you cut out the paper to make a shape, and then they put it behind the light and have the puppet dancing. It looks really beautiful if you've ever seen it, but very, very few Chinese people can make that these days. There is a clear example. And explain, if this trend continues, those who master these arts will die out and there will be no one to replace them, with China losing one of the arts that represents its unique history. So you can see how this is quite an important sentence to summarize everything that you've just said in those first 2 sentences. And why, and basically saying, why is it bad? You're losing something that represents your unique history. Okay, so there you can see we've got our 3 sentences. We'll put those together if you want to look at them all together, but I think we don't have time for me to read that. You can pause and read that if you like. Let's have a quick look at one more because we're almost at the 30-minute mark. Okay, nowadays children play less with others, so please pause, read that, write your paragraph. Welcome back. Okay, I'm thinking 2 sides. Why do children play less and how can we make them play more? I'd say the main reason is because people live in apartments and they don't go outside and play in the garden. Okay. How can we give a bit of an example? In the past, before people lived in cities, people would be walking home from school, they'd see their friend on the way home, and they'd go to join them. but now the children don't see the other kids as much on their way home. Okay, so we've given an example of exactly what's happening. Finally, I'm going to put in a solution in this paragraph. In order to make children play more while living in apartments, local governments need to build better and secure playgrounds where children want to go out to play, but also the parents feel safe letting their children play. Okay, so that's how we've put together a PEE. In our next two lessons, we're going to look at a full task 2 essay for different kinds of essay in lesson 8 and 9. Okay, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Again, you can read that if you like. That's 98 words. That's a long paragraph because this is an example of how you can do 2 paragraphs for the cause, problem and solution, or cause and solution. So that's an example of the kind of essay where you can put together 2 paragraphs, 2 BPs instead of 3 or 4. If you've got 2 of them that are 100 words each, that works. Okay, if you have any questions, please contact us. And again, in our 10th video, I will come together to answer as many questions as I can fit in that time. Thank you very much and have a good weekend or evening or afternoon. Bye-bye.